Welcome everyone to today's broadcast. I want to welcome back Ulrich de la Paz. For those of you joining us for the first time, or those who missed last month's broadcast with Ulrich on sanctions, he is an experienced AML compliance professional and the sanctions manager at a financial institution in Curacao. Ulrich, thank you for taking time out of your very busy holiday.
No problem.
I didn't realize it was a bank holiday there where you are.
Yes, but I'm here, so we do it with a lot of passion. So
we do, don't we? Yeah, it's never a work day when you're enjoying what you do. And yes, and thank you for coming back to us and sharing your insights and your experience with us today.
Thank you, Kimberly.
So a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. I want to remind our audience that this webinar is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. Ulrich, I don't think you are either, right?
Not yet.
All right, not yet. But we will take some questions from the live audience throughout the webinar, and we encourage you to ask your questions and put your comments in the questions box too, because I think we have quite a few very experienced people here, so feel free to share your experiences as we hit on certain topics. Today's webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Certificates will be auto-generated and sent to live audience members via email 1 hour after the end of the broadcast. So keep an eye out for that particular email. There is one handout today, and that is the Wolfsburg Group guidance on sanctions screening written in 2019. So please, for those of you, take a moment to download that or look it up on the internet. And Ulrich, you also mentioned there is one from OFAC, is that correct?
Yeah, there's one also from the US side, so it's in the BSA Act, but we can share that at a later stage also. So
yeah, or do you think they could also find it on the internet possibly?
Yeah, it's on there.
Yeah. Okay. So our attachments for that handout we'll try to include in the email that goes out usually on Friday with the recording of today's broadcast. And so again, keep an eye out for that. And we're going to try something new today. We're going to have a drawing. So make it a little bit fun. We need a little bit of fun in today's world, don't we? So we have some very nice cooler bags in stock that we want to share. So after today's broadcast, we'll pull 3 names from the live attendees list, and we'll announce the winners in our follow-up email that will go out on Friday. So keep an eye out for that. And if you are a lucky winner, Thomas will be reaching out to you to get your work email and your work address, and I'll make sure to put them in the post to you. So it might take a little while for our international winners, but please, that should be, I hope you will enjoy that. Now, last month, I think it was March 30th, we had our first sanctions webinar with Ulrich. We did give you some homework because we had talked about some pitfalls with screening, mostly about your screening settings if you're doing any kind of automated screening, and also just to get people to start questioning their screening procedures and policies and processes. So I do hope that homework helped you dig down into your screening settings and helped you learn a little bit more and gave you a chance to maybe do some testing and find some gaps. So I do hope that did help. Today, our discussion, we do have a few little discussion points. So I am going to skip over, by the way, our usual opening polling question because there is a lot to discuss today. Because sanctions is such a large topic and everyone's having different expectations of what we might be discussing today, I just want to say these are some of the points that I think we should be covering. But again, we could pivot based on your questions and comments that you post in the questions section. So I'm going to do my best to keep an eye on that area throughout the broadcast, and Ulrich and I will do our best to address your questions or thoughts as they come up. So again, please feel free to share that. So first point of discussion, the impact of sanctions on Russia. So I've been kind of keeping an eye on the news, and I have noticed that I've seen the headlines, Moscow teeters on the brink of default on its international bonds. Its credit rating has defaulted. I was reading yesterday, and I don't know how much you read and keep up in the news, Ulrich, so feel free to comment here.
Yep.
I was reading one article yesterday that the Russian state oil company couldn't find enough buyers this was apparently about 10 days ago, even though it was reported yesterday. They could not find enough buyers. So people or different countries are kind of backing off. There are some sanctions on that particular oil company that's due to kick in 15th of May. And that will block companies from reselling that oil outside of Europe. So apparently they can still buy it, but they won't be able to resell it outside of Europe. And of course, that is obviously to lessen the impact on residents in the EU countries.
Exactly.
And yeah, and also buyers of Russian oil are being required to pay in rubles, and apparently that is a new wartime contract, is what I think I heard it being quoted as. Usually it's in euros, and now the different countries are being asked to pay in rubles, so it's a bit of a change in the contracts that were originally drafted years ago. I also thought it was very interesting. About 7 or 8 days ago, I saw an article that Russia has drafted a bill, the Russian parliament has drafted a bill that would ban Russian banks from sharing banking secrets with foreign states. And this includes data on customers and their transactions, as well as about beneficiaries and beneficial owners. I thought that was very, very interesting too, because that kind of goes against where we've been heading this past decade, with all the new beneficial ownership laws in place, and sharing of beneficial ownership information, or disclosing beneficial ownership information. So Russia seems to be going back in time. Impact of sanctions on sanctioned individuals. Okay, so this is where it hurts, where the pain's really felt. There's been several yachts, I think, seized, and real estate. There's also Russian flagged or owned vessels are no longer allowed at U.S. ports. President Biden announced that about a week or so ago. All property interests in the U.S., and I'm sure this is very similar in the U.K., are possession of U.S. persons on blocked lists. They must be reported to OFAC, or in the U.K. that would be OFSI, I think is how it's pronounced. Entities owned directly or indirectly, or in the aggregate, and it's in the rule that I was looking at, it says that 50% more by one or more blocked persons are also blocked in the US. Again, double check in the UK if you're impacted by EU or UK, what the rules are specifically. And all transactions by US persons, even transiting, that involve property of blocked persons are prohibited unless authorized by a general or specific license issued by OFAC, are exempt. And because we talked last month about the different licenses, general, and specific licenses. And so some of these sanction companies do have general and specific licenses. The impact of sanctions on the sanctioning countries. Now, I thought the wording of one article in the Wall Street Journal was just beautifully put. They said the window into Russia is closing, the Iron Curtain is rising. And this is because Russia has banned certain economic data from being shared internationally. So we no longer know quite what's going on in Russia. Some of it's very limited data. There is also in March a repo task force. Repo stands for Russian elites, proxies, and oligarchs, and it met last month, and it is made up of international members. There is a rewards program that has been implemented in the US, also launched last month. It's called CARP, sorry, am I pronouncing it right? Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Rewards Program. And that is a bounty program. They will pay up to $5 million US dollars for tips on sanctions breaches. So I thought that was very interesting. FinCEN has also issued an advisory to US financial services urging banks to focus their efforts on detecting the proceeds of foreign public corruption. And of course, and they specifically talk about shell companies, offshore financial centers, and professional service providers. So there's going to be a little bit more due diligence on those transactions that are coming through. And of course, buyers of Russian natural gas and oil are facing shortages. And again, as I mentioned, Russian demanding payment in rubles versus contractual terms. Tom, how are we doing on the questions? Any comments or questions so far that we can address? Okay, I do see one that's coming in. I'll take a look at that. So yeah, so give me a second to kind of get through some of these initial, and then I will look at that one question that just came in. Impact on the compliance team. KYC and source of wealth funds documentation is more important than ever. Even looking back at your clients and customers that you've onboarded in the past, now more than ever, you really, really need to get anything that's missing up to date. I can't impress that enough, really, because you can. The reason being is when you are doing your screening against sanctions, if you do not have full KYC, you don't have enough information on the individuals that you are screening, then you might not be able to make the right call, or your analyst won't be able to make the right call. Is this a match or not? And that's actually come up with some of my clients a couple of times, where they were kind of saying, what do I do? I was like, well, you have to go back and get some KYC on these people, because you really can't determine. I think there's also going to be lots of potential legal issues. I found it very interesting. I learned this myself, just like I said, just the past couple of weeks, that to be put on a sanctions list, the government that's putting them on the sanctions list does not have to have any evidence of criminality. Did you know that, Ulrich?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
they could just put somebody on. If there's no due process, it's like the no-fly list. They could just say you're not allowed. And those asset seizures, the real estate, the yachts. I mean, obviously, as normal human beings, middle class, I see somebody getting their yacht seized. But let's think about it. They're also getting their home seized and bank accounts frozen.
It's basically getting everything from you away, so that you do not any financial your financial ability will be gone, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if there are legal challenges, but it could take years. And I was thinking about that. If you were the real estate agent or the broker or the lawyer or the accountant or anybody who advised on a transaction, even like even years ago or a decade or so ago, I was looking at one. It was a yacht that was seized. That was I think it was in Spain, and it was purchased in 2011. And I was thinking about, it's like, what's that mean? Could that KYC and the source of wealth and funds that were obtained back in 2011, if they start legally, challenging it, could that be subpoenaed? Could those files, that document, be subpoenaed on behalf of the advisors that helped with that transaction? So that might be something your company needs to look at, or get some legal advice on, or consider. That then also started me thinking about document retention policies. I think a lot of people like to keep their old files up to 7 years or something. Once they've closed a file or no longer advise that particular client. What happens if that KYC and due diligence was destroyed? So again, or if it's up for to be destroyed for your document retention policy, again, you might want to take into consideration any impact on your clients and your document retention policy. Also, you might have to look for some new vendors and suppliers. I was actually talking to a manufacturing firm the other day. They actually relied on a Ukrainian manufacturer, which has obviously since closed down. And so they are having to onboard new suppliers and source new resource and new suppliers as well, and vendors. So looking at those contracts, maybe even possibly ending contracts with existing vendors or suppliers, whether they're Ukrainian or Russian or Belarus. And also, it's not just AML compliance that's impacted. A lot of legal teams are having to scramble to review licenses and joint ventures and the clauses to those agreements. I was reading an article about Lush, the lovely Bath soap company in the UK. I love their products, and they were selling. They had a joint venture in Russia that they're no longer supplying. Anheuser-Busch and restaurant brands such as Burger King, closing down operations, and some of them are finding that they are legally not allowed to. So it's costing them millions. So there is huge impacts there. And of course, the impact of companies who do breach sanctions, they are severe. There is financial penalties and criminal prosecution risk. Ulrich, again, feel free, pop in, because you're the one that kind of talked about this as well. You raised this issue.
Yes. So at a certain point, yeah, it's not about having the customer only or dealing with transactions. It's about thinking about if you do a transaction or if you have a customer in your database, which may be listed or sanctioned. These are basically what you are facing: financial penalty, criminal prosecution risk, and I'm not speaking only about the entity you work for. It's your personal also. It can be personal too. On the other hand, your entity can be blacklisted. So if your blacklisted, basically, yeah, you're done. So you cannot do any transactions. And the other thing is being the risks. You know, uh, yeah, nobody can do any transactions with you. Also, so which is for sure being resulting in a loss of any financial services, or even sometimes it can go as far as like losing your banking license, not even doing business in your own country. So I'm speaking about bank, but maybe it relates also to real estate, a lawyer's office, consultancy firms, gatekeepers. So in fact, you need just to go back on some points that you mentioned earlier. You need to go back into your customer database to see whether you have these kinds of Russians or sanctions Russians in your database. But it's
Okay.
not easy. It's not easy.
You mentioned some personal risks too. I was reading where one of the sanctioned individuals was having to get loans from friends. What is
Sorry?
the risk? He was having to get loans from his friends to survive. Um, and what can that happen if, I mean, could somebody still give them a loan, or are they now at huge risk of being
The
seen as
point is
breaching?
you can give them if they are not sanctioned, there is no problem as a matter of fact. But the other thing is how will they get how will they get the funds? So how will you send the funds to them?
Yeah.
That's the main thing, you know. Uh, uh, um, it's not easy, as you mentioned in a couple of slides earlier. Most of the companies in Russia are requesting to be paid in rubles, but how will you do that? So you need to be having conversion. You need to have basically funds in rubles in order to transfer these. So maybe the bank that you are working with doesn't have rubles. They do not have an account in rubles with any of the corresponding rubles uh, Russian banks. So how will these loans be funded? It's difficult, and it's all of this is basically to put pressure on Mr. Putin in order to get rid of the war. You know,
Right.
so
Right.
they're driving these things in order to get their own persons to get and nationals to go against him. But yeah, it's not working. But as you said,
Okay.
it's a pity. It's a real pity.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pose this question that has been asked. And they ask, in your opinion, if an individual is a relative of a sanctioned target and owns a property that was historically purchased using funds gifted by the sanctioned target, is a relative or property in any way covered by the sanction? Ooh, that's a really good question. I would say no, because at the
No,
time,
no, yes, exactly.
you agree? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
I
So
agree with you
I
because
would say no. Yeah.
it's remember at a certain point it's not going back so far. but
Mhm.
it depends on what you have currently, and it's a relation to a sanctioned party. It depends what kind of relation it is. If they can determine that basically there is a strong relationship, maybe a father, a son, or whatever, maybe they can look after that because they will put pressure also on the family or the relationship.
Mhm.
You never
Yeah,
know.
and
But,
you could probably expect the extended family might also fall under sanctions.
oh
You
yeah,
also want to be very careful that that particular person, because they clearly have an association an association with that sanctioned individual, make sure that any further transactions are not helping to evade taxes.
exactly.
I was also thinking if they took that property and tried to put it on the market and sell it now, um, somebody looking back at the ownership of the property might it might cause some issues. But I don't think like that particular property, as long as they're not trying to sell it, and as long as the individual's not trying to help the sanctioned individual, um,
But
I think you're okay. But
that,
that's
yes,
where I would definitely go.
you know,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
you
he says it's
mentioned,
a child of the sanctioned target, not sanctioned themselves. I think you're still okay as long as that child is not sanctioned. But I'd keep a very close eye, making sure that the child is, and I'm assuming this is a grown adult child, somebody who's no longer a minor as well. So you might want to look into that. Or did they just put the property into a minor child's name? Because I did hear about one particular individual just days before he took all, yeah, not a minor. He took all of his shareholdings in companies and put it in his wife's name. I mean, and then of course, like 2 or 3 days later, was sanctioned, so that the his shareholdings went into his wife's name. Um, so they know that these sanctions are coming. So okay, so one other question. I don't know if it's a question or if it's a comment. She writes, companies with limited nexus to Russia and Russian country risk. No subsidiaries or any members of its board of directors or management of its principal. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my screen to increase. See if I can read it. No subsidiaries or any members of its board of directors or management or any of its principal shareholders is a target of the sanctions. Oops, sorry, it's my screen just uh, again, I have a tiny little box. It's sometimes very hard to read. But the trading has been suspended by NASDAQ with no reason provided to the client. Is this for the reason you mentioned that there doesn't need to be a criminal element for entities to be added to sanctions? Yeah, that's what I think. So it could be that NASDAQ is just de-risking and saying there's, of course, I'm just trying to figure out if company with limited nexus, limited connection to Russia and Russian country risk. That's an interesting one. Maybe NASDAQ has found some kind of connection.
yes, might
It's the
be.
only thing yeah, that's what I would think.
The
Yeah.
thing is, as soon as there is any kind of connection, or relationship, you
Mhm.
need to, they are looking at a little bit more in depth in order not to be in any sanction breach. So
Right.
they're going
And
to be very
looking
cautious
again,
there.
yeah, looking at these fines, excuse me, a million, 250,000 fine per violation. And of course, you know how it is, it's never just one violation. They're going to, find multiple.
Yeah, they're going to,
And this, look at the U.S. There's three of them. I mean, yeah, there's Trading with the Enemy Act and there's International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So anybody under the U.S. Regulations those are hefty fines, plus the legal fees to defend yourself as well. So those are pretty big there. Um, Feel free to keep asking your questions and putting in any kind of comments as well. I hope our responses are helping you guys out. Again, so last month we talked about the screening settings and I gave some homework. Again, I do hope that did help. I also did some a little bit more kind of review myself. Excuse me. Um, Now, Ulrich, you're a sanctions manager. You probably know your screening sections inside out, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Um, do you have any examples of where you've had to adjust your screening settings?
Um, by lowering the false positives, that is where you want to have. I have a lot of examples basically. Um, you know that we are here in on the island on where I'm living is we do have a lot of connection with Latin America. So
Right.
those Latin names, are can give you a big headache basically by having false positive, like a name as Anna. Is um, if one of let's just take an example from the Russian sanctions. So if maybe one of those oil companies have a tanker that is named Anna, basically you're gonna get a lot of hits. You see, and that is
Yeah.
whereby you need to um, uh, just a simple example where you need to go by and see, okay, when what do I need to do to my sanction program or to my sanction screening program in order to avoid those kinds of false positives. So it's something that you need to relook on a daily basis based on what is being changed at the moment.
Okay. Okay. Um, I was looking at the screening tool that we use in our system, and these are some of the different screening settings that our users can select and choose and adjust. And as you say, originally it used to be all about I want to reduce all these results that I would get, and because sometimes you can get 100 hits on one name, and then you've got an analyst going through and saying, no, it's not the person, it's not the person. It could waste a lot of man hours. So before we were always looking at making sure we could reduce those, as you say, false positives. Um, we've now since kind of gone through and just done a lot more checking and stuff like that, and looking at these settings. And the one that I kind of found was interesting was the different, the Michael Jones, but then still getting a hit if you have a profile in the screening that's David Michael Jones, and of course reverse name settings, which is like I use the example, like if I typed in Anderson Haley, would I get a hit on Haley Anderson? Because maybe as an analyst, maybe I typed it in wrong or something like that. And of course, we had to really take a look at all of our alias match settings as well. And as an example of adjusting your screening settings, so we did actually make a change to one of our clients, and suddenly their hits, their false positives, just massively during the overnight monitoring, massively increased. So we went, okay, that didn't work. So we were able to, excuse me, um, change it, again, just kind of like say, okay, wipe those and let's change the settings again, and let's see if we get a more reasonable
Changing just to
amount.
Kimberly, um,
Yes.
it's changing the fossil logic. What is called basically, it's not an easy task. It's like a
Oh
trial
no.
and error. On a daily
Yes.
basis. So as you said, you made a change and then you get a lot of hits. In the at night. So and then you
Right.
need to go back and say, okay, what did I change basically in order to go back to my original setting? But at the end, it's a trial and error, and
Yeah.
it's not an easy thing. You need to do it in test, and even if you do it in test, when you have it in production, it can still hit you very hard.
Absolutely. Yes. Exactly. Especially because sometimes those test, what I call UATs, which are the test databases that we always work with, they're dummy databases. So so suddenly, you think you're testing and you think, okay, it's all working, but then you put it in the live databases, and it's just like I said. But as you say, it's trial and error, and sometimes kind of go, oh no, let's go back to our original, or let's change the setting to another 20% or less, increase it or decrease it.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to, I mean, everybody's doing that right now. Don't be afraid to adjust your settings. One thing I will say about when you are changing your screening settings, make sure you log what change you made, who
Okay.
authorized that change, because the regulators are looking more into these kinds of who approved it. So make sure that you don't just have one person in IT or compliance just kind of making some random changes. Make sure you're logging and documenting these approvals and getting that senior management to sign off. Even if you have to do a few, that's fine, but a few changes through the weeks, but do log that.
And to add to that, also based on the regulator being checking on your what you did, and maybe if in one of those changes you got a lot of it, you need to document also what you did actually in order to get rid of all those false positives.
Yeah.
Because there might be in between those false positives, maybe that one, you never know, that was a real match, or maybe a real close match, and you need to document.
Right. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide, but I do see that there's another comment or question who's asking about personal liability. I'm going to cover that in the next slide a little bit, so hang on for that. Our responses to that. Screening pitfalls. Number one, I think making sure whoever is doing the screening reviews that and whether it's just entering the names, whether you're doing a manual data entry, just kind of one name at a time on onboarding, or you're doing the automated, integrated overnight monitoring, that kind of stuff, whatever system you're using, make sure that the people who are reviewing and entering that data, that they understand the settings and they understand these pitfalls. Hopefully you have them listen in today and to last week's recording, last month's recording as well, so that they can stay informed. The other pitfall I see is lack of KYC or missing KYC. These analysts cannot make a call on a name. Let's go back to that Michael Anderson name. That's a pretty common name. If they don't have the KYC, and I come from the law firm and company management side of AML compliance, and so under the regulations we had to have KYC on 2 directors of a company. What if you've got 5 directors and suddenly you want to screen all those directors, but you only have their names because you didn't get a full register of directors or something? So again, you might have to make some changes to your KYC policy to now get at least IDs and address verification on all directors and not just the legally required 2 in some jurisdictions. The other situation, and Ulrich, you might have a lot more examples here. So for instance, we were doing some testing a couple weeks ago on using the name like ABC Company versus A.B.C. Company. And when we used the dots between the letters, we didn't get a hit. And when we didn't use the dots, we did get a hit. So for an acronym named company. Also using the word. Do you have that experience a lot?
Oh yes, and depends. Sometimes, it's the spelling of it, the names, and also something very, very important. It's when inputting these customers or whatever, if they are correctly inputted too. That's something else. But because maybe you are doing a test for the ABC, and it's they did just put a point or a question mark or whatever that makes you not hitting this customer maybe. And on the other hand, you're looking at what you're getting from your screening list, maybe from AKAs, or also known as. So
right.
And that is where it can go very wrong when getting the false positive or the right matches. So
right.
And yeah, it's something that it's on a daily basis you will see. There are certain screening programs that are allows you to use noise words and so on in order for you to avoid these kinds of points or question marks or whatever, that you filter them out. But it's not all of them. So it's something that needs to be relooked on a daily basis. And the one, as you said, the one that are looking at this screening exception reporting, like the false positives coming out, they need to be trained and knowledgeable indeed, as you said, in order to analyze indeed if these are really false positive. Because if it is false positive, maybe you want to add it to maybe like a called noise fish in order not to again get
Mhm.
a false positive the next day or the day after or 1 month later. So yeah,
Right.
the, we call it screening pitfalls, but it's rather helping us actually and all helping you in order to get the right screening program.
Right. Right. Let me ask you this. Would you, because I know things like ACAMs, these and different institutions, they offer certifications
Yeah.
for specifically sanctions. Um, would you almost recommend that because this is such a minefield right now, and these things aren't going away. I think we've got a few years of this stuff happening. Um, would you kind of suggest that, maybe giving these analysts the resources so they can get the certification
Oh
or
yeah.
go take some
Oh yeah.
classes?
There is a lot. If you are a maybe not everybody is a member from KE camps, but
Right.
there's a lot of trainings right now. You do not need basically. There are some of them like this one. We have one. It's a free webinar, but there are also other free ones. But there are also
Mhm.
ones that you need to pay for. There are lower certifications and not specifically like a camps or a camp certification. There are foundations. They call it foundations so that you can learn what you need to do, and these like screening ways of screening, what you need to look for. All of these are being targeted and tackled also in this kind of training. So I for sure I do recommend to look for these kind of trainings. You have a
Okay.
lot of them. ACAMS has them. I know I do not know this from. She is from Holland. I don't. She has also. I do not recall the name specifically, but we can share that at a later stage. She has a
Yeah.
lot of trainings. Some of that. Even like for instance, ACAMS has like right now they have a page called Ukraine Crisis Rapid Response and Resources.
Okay.
So you get a lot of updates on there, so to keep you up to date. So I use that on a daily basis. So
Oh,
basically,
okay. Well, while we're at it, what other resources are you using that others that are listening in could probably look into?
when it comes related to transactions, it depends on if you got a transaction. I'm just going to transaction right now.
Hmm.
If you get like for instance a positive possible positive match on a transaction, and you need to look, maybe it's going to, let's say it's going to Russia. You need to look, okay, I will use for sure the A camps, but the first one you go to is you go to OFAC in order to see what is the executive order specifically. Is there any general licenses on this particular transaction? The other thing that you can use is the frequently asked questions page on the OFAC site. So,
Okay.
and all of these will help you in order to determine if the transaction that you are processing, and I'm not speaking only about transactions going out, but there can be transactions incoming also from these countries that you need to maybe relook at it in order to see if maybe there is something that went through the cracks from the correspondent bank, maybe in this case that you are receiving. So it's from both ways. It's not only you sending, checking the outgoing, it's also checking the incoming also. So
Okay.
these are some of these websites that I use on a daily basis in order to make sure that you are doing the correct things. And on the customer side, it's basically um, there are some additional on the same on the OFAC. There is some SDNs. They call it SDN search list that you can just put a name in it, and you will see if there are sanctions or not, or the country. And in you have that also on the EU site,
Yes.
that you can search names in it, and you will get all kinds of information or countries. So there are a lot that you can use as a sanction officer or AML officer, whatever it is, that can help you make the right decisions.
Right. I actually found those. Those are actually where you could just do a one name search at a time on OFAC and um, the I think it's the UK Treasury. I can't remember if it's UK or the EU one. Where so you could just search a name, a one-on-one. So if you do work at a company that has kind of everything's kind of automated and not a kind of just enter a name at a time kind of license, you can still do that for free because it's not behind a paywall either. So I thought
Oh yeah.
that
Oh
was
yeah.
really good. And of course, the other thing you want to look for with what I call the pitfalls is any kind of double-barreled and hyphenated names can sometimes either potentially miss a hit. So you want to double check those and your transliteration process, and that is the process of converting one language to another script. And I was reading, for instance, like the Spanish name. I won't try and pronounce it. I'm sure I'll be brutal on it. So, but it could be translated to William for English speakers. So again, you have to think about when you are having that international client base or customer base, how you're doing your foreign customers and nationals. So one person does ask, how does personal liability work? If an FSP, financial service provider, breaches sanctions, would the authorities also look into the actions of the individuals working for that financial service provider to see if they should be personally liable for any breach? What
Oh yeah.
factors might the authorities take into account? For example, the experience of the individual, years of working in compliance. My first impression on that question is it's all about the FSP's training. I don't think if you had a KYC analyst or a compliance person who had no compliance certification, they were just given the job, and yeah, they and also their workload. I have had regulators tell me in the past that they are looking at workload of compliance staff and whether or not they can handle it. So I think if the training was not provided to that individual within the financial service provider, then they have a way to say, and it's not my fault, you know, and that's more than just that standard. I know in the regulations, guidance of AML regulations, one of the pillars of compliance is that we're supposed to be doing training of staff.
Yeah.
Well,
That's one of the pillars, and it's the same.
yeah, and I think it's more than just AML awareness training,
Yeah.
which is usually, way back in my, 10, 15 years ago, it was just kind of done annually. I think nowadays they're going to want to see that you trained that KYC analyst or that sanctions analyst in and what to look for.
And just to add to that, basically, Kimberly, and
Mhm.
they are looking at, like, the question was, looking at the personal liability of the person doing the thing. They are more looking like at, was any willful blindness in there? That's mainly what
Oh,
they're. So
yeah,
yeah, so was it on purpose, or maybe, as you know, just lack of training or whatever? So,
right.
and it's there that they are going, basically, because maybe when they're coming in, is they're looking at the whole process, and even there are examples of U.S. sanctions, or sorry, U.S. penalties that went to companies that they did all what they could by training and everything, but still something this fell through the cracks, and they still got a fine. They still went into the personal the personnel, basically the officers who did the transaction. So you can take an example of the compliance officer of was that money transfer business called uh, uh, uh,
It's
it's not
Western
Western
Union.
Union. It was
Oh,
not
not
Western.
that one.
It was the other one. Uh, he did do, basically, he did a whistle blowing, saying
Okay.
saying that the company was doing something wrong, and all those days he gave everything. At the end of the day, he was personally liable too. So
Oh,
he was
really?
doing. Yeah, oh yes, oh yes.
No, he was a whistleblower. Interesting.
exactly, by doing whistleblowing, and still he got a personal liability for that. Apparently, apart from the whistleblowing, because they said the US said basically that he should have known better in order not to do the transaction, even though he was mandated to do that.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And that personal liability issue might be something we see in a year, 2 years, um, being kind of more settled as far as who's liable, if the individual is liable. But again, I think I would start with making sure they have training. Somebody has actually recommended in the comments, they said they highly recommend to take ACAM certification CGSS. I don't know what the CGSS stands for.
Yeah.
And of course, and if you're in Europe, there's also the International Compliance Association, and we don't get commission or anything like that. So just
No, no,
know,
no, no.
I'm not saying one program is better than the other. I'm not an ACAM salesperson, so but do look into getting some good certifications for your compliance teams. But of course, if you don't have the budget, just keep trying to find the free stuff too. I
All
get it.
about the cost of compliance. All about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's all. Yeah. And unfortunately, the cost of compliance is going to increase these while this is all going on. So somebody else has put in another question. It says corporate entity is not subject to the EU restrictions, but what about an EU national working for that company who are Canadian and hold an EU passport, who in turn would be providing client services? As the EU national must comply with the EU restrictions, does this mean that an EU national would not be permitted to work on the file? Ooh, I'm kind of confused by that one. A corporate entity is not subject to, if it's not subject to EU restrictions, I'm not sure what the issue or the question is. Maybe an EU national? I might have to come back to you.
I think they're looking like if it is allowed actually to do business, or at least I'm seeing like I'm just thinking how we can relate that to. Whew, that's maybe we need to come back on that.
Yeah, I might have to drill down into that one, because you're saying that the company that the EU national works for is not subject to sanctions on the interpretation, and this will be intensified given the May 10th deadline. So apparently there's some May 10th. For example, the Cyprus Ministry of Finance released confirmed that the prohibitions do not apply where the trustee or beneficiary is an EU national or a natural person. Oh, okay. So you're drilling down into some very specific law that I am not familiar with. This person is. I'm gonna have to look into that one. Might have to email you after the broadcast and say, give me some more details.
Yes.
And okay, so we're looking at 10 more minutes, so we're gonna wrap up here. I wanted to put what I call a sanctions forecast. And when Ulrich and I were first planning this out, I had said in 10 years' time what's going to be going on. And Ulrich very casually put out there, he goes, we don't know what's going to happen in 10 days' time.
Oh, yeah. Things can change rather quick here.
Yeah. And sure enough, I looked, and there is another EU is about to issue their 6th sanctions package anytime now. And it's expected to really hit the Russian oil and gas industries as well as the banking industries. Now, do not quote me on this. I said Sberbank and Gazprom Bank are not sanctioned, and of course, this is what we kind of talked about last month, where the UK might sanction them, but not the US. And like Gazprom Bank, I was looking at it. It does have a UK general license. I think that was the UK website.
Like, if I can just add to that, Kimberly, like Gazprom is in the US, it's basically the debt and equity restrictions.
Right.
No, but in the EU is debt equity restrictions too. But in London is asset freeze. So basically, you cannot do that. you know, and
Okay. Okay.
that is there where you differ some things, and there are certain, you know, like we go back again, the ACAMs, there is a, like they publish like a flyer, and where you have all these bank sanctions banks with
Hmm.
what kind of sanction per country it is, so you can easily use that and say, okay, what is allowed, what is not allowed, for instance,
Okay. Yeah.
even
And I
for
was,
the oligarchs. So
yeah, because they do these carve outs in these sanctions,
yeah.
is the U.S. and the EU, because they want to ensure like gas can still arrive,
Oh yeah.
or these
They,
debt
they need
payments
to
can
do
still
business
be
too.
made.
They still need to do
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. They're very I don't know. Yeah, they definitely think they don't just go, they're sanctioned, boom, nothing. There's all these different carve outs.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, in 10 days, there's going to be a new sanctions package going out from the EU, and of course, it seems the US is always doing different things, and of course, I'm sure the UK the same way. Um, in 1 year, what can we expect? Well, obviously, in the news, we've already got higher food and gas prices here in the US. I'm sure it's the same elsewhere. Um, I think there's also probably going to be a lot of cyber attacks on US and EU refineries, the oil refineries and financial institutions. I think we can expect more of that. I also think we're going to have some exhausted compliance staff. Management are probably going to have to work hard to ensure no burnout. And I'm talking about like the one person talking about, that personal liability.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't know for sure
Yeah.
what's going to happen, how personally liable. So um, exhausted and worried compliance teams, especially if they are asking for resources and those resources aren't being given. So yes, your compliance costs are going to increase. Sorry,
Yes.
management.
Yeah, you need to look for some specialists, or at least some knowledgeable people who can work with these things,
Hmm.
because it's not like, hey, I'm a director, oh, this is new thing, so I can do this too. No, it's
Right.
not, it doesn't work like that. So it's not
Yeah.
a one, you know, one thing, one man show. So
Right.
you
Right. It can't be. Yeah. Um, Also, I do expect we'll see a lot of legal challenges with these sanctions and these asset seizures. And I was kind of wondering again, does this mean old KYC and CDD on these transactions where these seizures where these assets were purchased? Could that be subpoenaed? How's that going to impact advisors, legal advisors, and um, brokers on those asset purchases? I think there's going to be some legal issues there. So again, if you are involved in any um, with sanctioned clients that are getting assets seized, and you helped out with that, even if it's a decade ago, even if they're no longer your client, you might want to get some legal advice to figure out or look into that and figure out what you need to do there. And of course, I also think in 10 years' time, we're going to look back on today and kind of going back to the stress and strain of what's going on today. I think it's still fascinating. We were talking at the very beginning. We're kind of passionate about the subject. So you're willing to work on your bank holiday, Ulrich.
yeah.
Um, but this is, I'm going to use that 2020 word again, unprecedented. Um,
And
so yeah, I think it's fascinating what we're doing today, and I think it's going to be some huge impacts in the next 10 years of
Emily,
what's happening
the
today.
thing is, I always give, when I give training, sometimes I tell them, you are a compliance officer basically 48 hours. So, and you will, and you
48
will,
hours a day.
yes, you will continue to be that in 10 years. If you're still a compliance officer, you still look back and you see, okay, things has changed a lot, and you need to keep up. Other than that, you will lose it. You will lose it.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing too, and I'm gonna sorry, just close your eyes if you guys can't handle the big changing of the slides. See if I can find one slide I went to talking about the impact of sanctions on sanctioning countries, and see how we have all this repo task force, the FinCEN focus on Russian nationals, the CARP program. There's another impact that's going on here, and that is with so much focus on Russian sanctions, law enforcement are going to be missing out on tips and SARS, suspicious activity reports, on other criminal activities such as human trafficking, drug trafficking, tax evasion, fraud, elder abuse, ransomware, bribery, and corruption. And bribery is on the rise because of the recent supply chain bottlenecks
Oh
too.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So, and as well as human trafficking. Human trafficking was a big deal, a year or two ago, or even 3 years ago. I mean, there was a lot of webinars on human trafficking. We even did one, and I think now suddenly everybody's turned their eyes, towards Russia, and we're gonna miss that. So we're gonna see an increase in crime. This is almost a money launderer's, tax
Kimberly,
evader's dream. Yeah.
but you know what's funny? I got a comment from a colleague of mine a week ago, and he said, "Where is the pandemic?
Yeah. Yeah. Where's the pandemic?
Are we still in the pandemic? Because everybody's speaking about Russia and Ukraine and all those things." So
Yeah. Well, I was following the trucker convoy thing going on in Canada. Uh, and that was big on our news, or on my headlines, because I was really looking into that, because they were actually starting to freeze those truckers' bank accounts.
oh yeah.
And I, for protesting in Canada. And I remember thinking, as a compliance officer, going, "Whoa, I'm not sure how I feel about that." And then all of a sudden, nothing. It was all Russia. So just overnight, the trucker convoy issue just disappeared. But absolutely. Okay, so we have another.
Sorry, I do have a question that came in on my a friend of mine, and
Yeah.
it's related to the oil contracts and so on. So he said, okay, oil and other similar contracts. Russia is closing the gas tap with Poland today. Is there a chance
Yes.
that third parties will conclude contracts with Russia or intermediaries through a backdoor construction, obscure detours, in order to be able to deliver as they did during the apartheid era in South Africa? Yes, I think. But again,
Okay.
I really think that will be some, contracts with third parties, but still, you need to look at these type of contracts because those are the ones that will be um, uh, getting increased. Because from the back door, they're still dealing with those Russian oil and gas and so on. But on the other hand, there will be also other countries benefiting from these bans, like South Africa. You never know.
Right.
So
Okay.
they are looking for alternatives ways. So that's that's my answer on that. I do not know if you want to take a take on that, but that's my take on that.
I don't have a take on that. I'm not familiar enough to put in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah,
But I'll yeah, defer to you. So,
no worries.
um, somebody else has written, and this will probably be the last question we can take, because we're 2 minutes to the top of the hour. And just so you know, York and I have already agreed we will probably do another follow-up sanctions, probably in like average, probably what, six weeks, you think? Well, we'll name a date later, because we think this topic is something that's just going to have to, we're going to have to just keep hitting on it for a while until people get more comfortable. But so this last question is, the fifth set of sanctions, I'm assuming you talk about the EU sanctions, target Russians and involved in trust and legal structures similar to trust. They prohibit service providers from facilitating the provision of these services. In your view, how will this affect those service providers? Yeah, that's going to be a huge impact on trust and corporate service providers, as well as, I'm assuming, the lawyers that help set those out.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's a minefield. You're going to have to be very, very, very careful. And I'm just trying to think. I haven't seen the actual. You thank you very much. You put in the actual regulation and the article number. I'll have to go through and read that specifically to see what it's saying, because it says the fifth set of sanctions target Russians' involvement in trust. Does that just mean all Russians? I'll have to
That
look at the wording.
that's the thing. So Kimberly, I just want to add to that.
Hmm.
Right now, it's okay. the sanctions are against certain Russians, oligarchs or companies or banks.
Right.
It looks like more and more people are looking at the Russians.
Yeah, he
So
says
the
all
Russian
Russians. Yeah.
nationality, basically. If you look
Yeah.
what Wimbledon did, Wimbledon said, okay, listen, we are banning any Russian players and Belarusian players. So it's not about the players are not sanctioned, but they
Yeah.
cannot participate in Wimbledon. So
Yeah,
it's
that's a good point.
kind
Good
of
point.
changing right now, a couple of days or a couple of weeks already. Like people are looking at, okay, should I deal with this Russian person or not?
Hmm. Yeah, and that goes back down to it's going to be your risk appetite. Now, sorry, he also points out that this regulation kicks in May 10th, and whew, that's a really tough one. So, but yeah, I think if it's going to be again, I'll have to look at the exact wording, but I think this might mean you're going to have to de-risk your Russian clients,
It
if I'm
might, it
understanding
might,
that correct.
it might be. Yes, it might be. It might.
Yeah, he says there is a discussion as to what structures similar to trust entails. Yeah, yeah. The wording's not maybe not entirely clear. That's interesting. I did not know that, so I will have to look into that.
You can share that with me too, Kimberly, so we can.
Yeah, I will. I will. Okay. So we're at the top of the hour, 2 minutes past, and I'm determined. So before we go, again, I want to encourage everyone to follow Silo Compliance System on LinkedIn and follow. You can find me. Sorry, you won't be able to find me if you just search me, but find me through my connection to Silo. You can find Ulrich very easily on LinkedIn as well. So please do connect with us and follow Silo. And we do on Silo, we announce our next webinar event. I want to thank our audience members too, again, for joining us. Thank you to those of you that shared the webinar event with your colleagues on LinkedIn or forwarded our emails. Our audience is growing. Huge, it's huge, and it's fantastic. I'm so happy to see so many of you here. And again, just to remind you that the winners of the drawing will be emailed today and announced in the. We'll draw their names and we'll announce them in the email following up. Usually on Friday, that sets the record for that attaches the recording. And one polling question before we go, and then I've got two webinars to announce. So please still hang on. Tom, you want to go ahead and issue that polling question? And again, I just wanted to get some feedback from you guys. After today, how strong do you think your AML program is, especially in relation to your sanctions screening? All right. So we've got some great responses here. Good. Low numbers on the I'm very concerned. But that's great. But 50, so yeah, you can go ahead and close that down. So we've got about half of you who think you do have some improvements to make. Great. I'm glad that people are finding ways to make some improvements. 31% say you're very comfortable. It's fantastic. 9% saying you do have some concerns, and 8% are saying it's probably not applicable to you. All right. So thank you again very much for that. You can hide that one. Thank you. The data privacy webinar is going to come up 25th May. I've got Damon. He's head of advisory at BDO Jersey. So he's going to be talking with us. I'm not sure if we're going to be talking about data privacy governance or the data privacy laws. So just kind of stay tuned as we kind of focus in on that conversation. That's 25th of May. Again, I'll send out the registration link in the follow-up email that should go out on Friday. And we'll have a Sanctions 3, right, Ulrich? You think we need a follow-up one? Okay.
Yeah. If you see the response right now, I think we have still things that needs to be talked about. So.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to do. So
every day. So
yeah.
there's a lot.
Yeah. So and hey guys, if if you get these issues, email me, and yeah, we'll let me do some research occasionally, and I'll look into some very specific. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I can kind of sometimes take a look at this stuff. So feel free to email me in advance, and we'll announce that date as well.
Yeah.
So, All right, again, and so those of you who are asking, yes, there is a certification or certificate that gets attached to the email, and that should hit your inbox in about an hour. It's auto-generated for live attendees. And somebody was asking, will the presentations be shared? Yes, the recording will be shared. It's also on our YouTube channel. So you could actually just go to YouTube and search AML Gray Matters, Gray with a E, I believe. And we have a channel with all of our recordings, but you will also get the recording in the email. And if you want to use this internally, I'm okay with that, right? Ulrich, you're okay if you want to use it internally to share with your staff? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Raul says, but again, to our audience, and Ulrich, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate you taking
always
time on your holiday. All right. To our audience, thank you again for joining us. We know that your time is valuable too. And it's important that you have well-documented policies and procedures in place in order to pass a regulatory inspection. So I hope today's broadcast will help you strengthen your sanctions screening program. And from our poll, it looks like you have found some ways to do so. But again, remember, sanction screening is just one aspect of AML compliance. As our discussion talked about, we might need to increase our training programs as well, and we need to focus on source of wealth and funds and getting KYC. So if you need to be, and again, just remember, you need to be able to easily demonstrate to your regulators that you are complying in all areas. So again, that's that risk assessment, the staff training, retaining KYC, and due diligence. So if you're struggling, I do encourage you to stay tuned and learn more about Silo Compliance System. There's a short little 2-minute video that will play so you can see the highlights. Again, as I always say, it's a system I wish I'd had as a compliance officer and MLRO myself. And that's it for today's broadcast. Thank you again, Ulrich, for being with us, and I look forward to having you back probably in about 6 weeks' time or so. And to your audience, thank you again. Yeah. Okay. And great, thank you. Until next time, this is Kimberly Smith signing off. Thanks again.
Anti-money laundering compliance and customer and vendor onboarding involves multiple processes that must be done correctly and by the right people in the most efficient way. The tasks include gathering customer and vendor ID and verification documents, screening against sanctions and politically exposed persons lists, analyzing any reputational risk, periodic monitoring to assess any changes and updating due diligence, and staff training on money laundering, terrorist financing, bribery and corruption awareness and risks, as well as keeping them up to date on your policies and procedures and new regulatory requirements. In addition to the onboarding processes being strictly followed and documented, management must have access to critical compliance metrics and information to steer the company through regulatory waters and mitigate customer and other risks. With Silo Compliance System, these obligations become much more efficient. With Silo, your staff can enter the customer's information and upload due diligence documents and any other documents that you require. Key information entered about your customer automatically calculates a risk score, a calculation using a risk-based approach determined by you at initial implementation of Silo. In addition, if you have screening enabled, when the customer's name is first entered into Silo, the name is checked against sanctions, politically exposed persons lists, and adverse media. You'll see results of screening immediately and can review any potential hits right away. And with screening enabled, your customers and vendors are continuously monitored for any sanctions advisories, helping you get ahead of any potential reputational risks. No company is too small to benefit from using Silo. Even if your onboarding processes seem under control today, if one key staff member becomes unavailable or there is any increase in your customer portfolio, compliance with strict onboarding and review processes can quickly overwhelm a small company and put you at risk. Plus, implementing Silo can reduce the need to hire additional staff to manage compliance obligations and reduce your risk of non-compliance regulatory penalties and continued inspections. No one goes through an inspection or audit with great ease, but several users have reported that their inspections went more smoothly and with Silo they had improved outcomes. Reach out to us today to schedule a demo of Silo.